Hey everybody! Today is a great day. Today marks the release of version 1.3 of my Simple Physics Chains plugin. To begin with, I just want to say thank you to all the support I've gotten from you guys. It's been a really fun project to work on, and I've received a lot of messages talking about all the cool implementation uses you guys have been using the chains for. And some of those gave me ideas on how I can make this asset even more flexible to use. I've rewritten the chains in C++, so these assets will be packaged and treated as a plugin from here on, instead of just an entire download of project files. Each asset, of course, is blueprintable, and I've included a project content folder where you can find and modify any of the assets to your liking, and a demo map to see the features as well. I intended this update to address some of the shortcomings I felt the last version had that were bugging me. I took what worked with the prior version and built it all over again from the ground up. The biggest change you're going to notice is the way that the chain generates. It no longer creates just a straight line of links, but instead is now spline based, allowing you to do what most spline based assets you can find in the marketplace do. You can modify the spline, add or remove points, and the link meshes will generate along it. The only difference is that this spline can then simulate physics and interact with the world. So let's get to it and show some of this stuff off. The physics chains come in 4 different flavors. I'll just show you them right now. We have the chain gun, the physics chain, which is what you see right here. The hanging physics chains, they come in 2 different kind of variants. And then the socketed chain right here, which is just like it's the physics chain, but with the ability to just socket to skeletal meshes easier. And a blueprint to kind of show that off here, and the player chain gun example, which shows off the chain gun. So really we have 4 chains here. We're going to take a look at the first one, the physics chain. This is going to be your basic chain that people are going to be adding into their world. So we have 4 different attachment types. We have no ends fixed, start fixed, end, and both ends fixed. And when pressing play, you'll notice that those links in particular will simulate, and you can see that the start link fixed prevents the start link from actually moving, whereas the end link fixed does what it says, keeps that one fixated, and with the both ends fixed, every link is simulated except the 2 ends. No ends fixed, I don't know why anyone would use one, but you can flop a chain around. Each chain you can swap out its skeletal mesh. Now you're actually not going to notice any change, and this is because this is the mesh it's going to be using when it presses play. To save on performance, I actually use a skeletal mesh variant when you're seeing it in the editor, and then if you choose not to simulate physics, it's going to use that static mesh as an instance just to save on performance. So let's actually switch out the chain links. So I like to pair them up, so design 2. And just to visualize that, that's what design 2 looks like. Design 3. This is what design 3. And you know, each chain has and the meshes you're going to include are going to have their own scale as well. So this is why I've included some different scaling parameters. So you can kind of make these fine-tune adjustments. So let's actually do that with this chain here. So as before, you have 4 different attachment types. This is going to be how the chain behaves in the world if it's simulating physics. You can also change out the scale of the chain. So right now it's set to 0.2, but you can do 0.4, 1, 0.01. So we're going to stick with 0.2. And the additional offset per link. So if you notice right now they're kind of clipping into each other. So let's offset those a bit further. 20. Actually, we need to shrink it. So like that. Maybe that seems to look appropriate. Another thing you can do is enable or disable physics. So now the chain is acting as a solid collider made up of instances. You can allow the chain to snap and enable gravity. So let's do both of these at the same time. So we have gravity disabled and chain snapping. So if we grab any of the links and move them around, the chain is actually floating around in space. And if you throw it hard enough, it can rip in half. Going on that, with the chain being able to snap, you can choose a number of random snapping points. So by default, just the center link is going to snap, but you can actually adjust that using a random snapping point. So now it's going to pick any of the links within the chain. And then you can also choose a number of these random snapping points. So you can have 5 random links that are chosen to snap. It's not to say that it's going to be a guaranteed 5 Rather, it's going to have 5 opportunities to pick a link and set it to break. So it might set the same link twice to break, and you might end up with 4 breaking links. It's just the way I designed it. And then you can also choose the breaking threshold. So this number represents how much force is needed in a linear and angular threshold to allow it to snap. So right now they're both set to the same value. So regardless if you pull the chains linearly far enough or if you twist it too ridiculously, it will cause it to snap. And that's pretty much everything for the default physics chain. All the physics chains included, even the hanging ones and the socketed ones, are all spline based. So you can just take any of these points here and just drag them around. Ooh, let's get that here. You can drag these around and kind of modify the spline to your taste. You know, if you kind of want to already prearrange the way a chain is going to look while it's hanging, you can do that, but they'll also simulate as well. So let's simulate this chain. Enable gravity. And there you go. So that's the physics chain for you. Alright, up next is the simple hanging chains. So these ones come in 2 different flavors. We have the hanging along the chain and the hanging off the chain, as I'd like to call them. Right now we have an enum describing the hanging style. So you can actually pick the style. Oh, here, I've got this one selected. You can actually pick the style right here, and it will adjust. So these chains are just actually tilted on their axis. There we go. So let's start with the hanging along the chains. This one was a request that someone actually wanted, in which they wanted to hang lanterns along the chain in the last build, and I actually only had it set for hanging meshes off a chain and only one and only. So it was kind of limited in that way. So I wanted to include an alternative version here. And this one, let's just go along with it. So we have the original chain parameters here. You can affect the chain in the same way that you can affect all the basic physics chains, but we have the hanging mesh parameters as well. So like before, you can pick a static mesh that you want to hang off of the chain. I have an included lantern mesh here. We want to repeat along the chain. You can choose the mesh scale, course, so I've kind of paired it up to match the link sizes here that I've used for demonstrations. We have our starting link offset, so by default this is set to 0. If you want to actually offset the first mesh from wherever this chain is, you can just increment this, and this is going to count by link. So as you see, is actually incrementing by the scale or the bounds, the x bounds of the link. So let's go down to 4. One downside to this actually that I've thought about is the fact that if you set this to 3, this is a horizontal link. And this link is not going to visually link up with this mesh. And this is kind of a downside to the way a chain link works, but I think for most people's purposes, you can kind of sell the effect just by, putting these along and just taking your time to make sure that you're matching it up. So in my case here, I want these to line up with one of these vertical links. That way it looks like it's actually being suspended. You can adjust the offset. So this is what they look like by default. So we can actually kind of line them up. In my case, it was, I think, minus 28 units. Worked well. You can also choose the rotational offset. So I like a 90-degree offset. And then they also have min and max rotation as well. So if you were to, you wanted your lanterns to kind of have some sort of effect, like they're slightly ajar or blowing in the wind, you can do that as well. Let's set these all back. And like before, these chains are simulated as well. So each one of these meshes actually creates a constraint from itself to the link it's attached to, and then the chain acts as before. So any of these static meshes here are able to basically be impacted by physics, and they simulate with everything else. This chain has multiple breakpoints in it, just for demonstration purposes, so that's why it broke really easy. So just have the values lower here. Going on to the hanging mesh, this one is pretty straightforward. It basically does everything this chain does, However, it only attaches one link or one static mesh to the end of the chain. And this object is basically used for, hanging lanterns if you wanted a meat hook in like a butcher shop, or you wanted to hang some cables from a spaceship. That's where you can kind of do this. So you can hang something off of the end, or you can just, use one of these physics chains too and hang nothing off the end if you just wanted some dangly ropes for the player to run into or bump into. Just like before, these ones too are also simulated. Very weak chain there. That bouncing that you're seeing just is because I'm in the editor. So if you actually were to possess a player and walk around in the scene, you notice that there's no hopping and stuff. And I believe it's just the physics time stepping while just being in the editor. You notice like I'm holding right click, and if I let go of right click, everything starts bouncing. That's not the chains, that's just me being in the editor. Alright, and on to the socketed physics chain. This one is pretty straightforward here. I've actually included a blueprint, but what we have here is a socketed physics chain set as a child actor. Here you can actually set the parameters of the chain. And the additional thing that this chain includes is the ability to socket onto static meshes or skeletal meshes. So in the construct script here, I cast out to the socketed chain and just attach it to the two bones of the skeletal meshes included, being pillar A and pillar B. Both of these pillars are included in the project, and they have 6 bones that I'm attaching to. These bone points are just for demonstration purposes, just to show that you can pick between them, and I've included an enumerator just to flip between these, so I can actually pick the different positions, and in real time you'll see the chain just snap and adjust. This is going to be handy for anyone who is wanting to like tie a chain to 2 particular bones on a body, or a character, whether it being like shackling hands or, strapping chains from a player to a wall. It's not guaranteed that they're actually going to perform or like look and act like real chains, right? Like if you walk too far away, they either will use the breaking threshold and break, or they might actually glitch out. That's kind of unavoidable at points, but for the most part, this is going to be a great baseline to kind of begin socketing a chain to a player. Just like that. And last but not least, we have the player chain gun example. Just to kind of fill you in on these ones, these are just all the exact same physics chains as the ones in the middle, but just with their physics disabled. So they're all actually instanced static meshes here. There's nothing going on. Okay, to get the player actually working, since this is a plugin, you can't actually modify someone's input controls. So if you drag this player into your scene, it might not actually work, or it might not have any functionality, and that's because your inputs just aren't set up. So in your project settings, you might have to go to your input here and then actually determine which inputs are going to be used for your player. Those are the ones I've used, and I'm just going to drag this in. Let's just enable the player and press play. And if you left click, you can fire out a chain. And if you right click, you can retract the chain. So I'm just showing off the chain gun example. This chain is quite unique, in which you can generate the links in real time, one by one, and then it simulates upon impact. So it's a little bit different from a regular physics chain, but it might serve for some cool gameplay uses here. And just like the other physics chain, it's going to behave the exact same way. The way it just generates is different. But as you can see, I can rip the chain, I can attach it to, physics objects and pull them around. It's going to interact and behave as expected. So let's actually go grab one of these lamps here. As you can see, it's latched onto the lamp. And I can actually pull this lamp off of its chain, pull it around with me. Ooh. And here's the non-physics colliding chain. Very cool to see that kind of move around. And let's rip this lamp off. So you notice that jitteriness. That jitteriness is the constraints and the chains actually colliding and freaking out. That's something that I've tried really hard to avoid with these chains, and that's why there's some certain features that aren't actually implemented. I've aimed to make these as stable or as reliable as I could, given the kind of, constraints that Unreal's physics constraints give me. There's not much I can do about the way that some of these things are going to behave without coding my own custom, physics solution. But this is the best that I could have come up with with the tools that I've been given. And I hope that you guys find some really cool uses for this. This is definitely much more performant than it was before. These chains have not even, begun to impact my computer. And I don't have like a crazy computer. But it's something where I've found that they've been a lot more performant to use than before. And probably given that they're coded this time around rather than in blueprints. Hey, so I hope that this really clears some things up with the simple physics chains. Hopefully you guys are able to throw these into your world and use them as easily as I've been able to show you. If you guys have any other problems, just email me or message me on the marketplace, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible with some fixes and changes. If you guys are wondering where you can find this asset, I'll leave a link in the description below. Anyways, hope you guys have a great day. Enjoy.